Take a deep breath in. Have a prayer. Spirit of the risen Christ, be among us and within us. Make real to us the story of resurrection. And may the words of my mouth, the meditations of all of our hearts, promote the highest good in all. Amen. One of my closest friends, Elizabeth, who's from Holland, has a nephew, Paul. He lives in Holland. Paul is not religious at all. But where he lives in Holland, the neighborhood that he lives in, it's a very religious neighborhood, and he has a 6-year-old son, Tice. And Tice came home one day and said to his dad, with incredible enthusiasm that only a 6-year-old can have, "Dad, have you heard of this guy named Jesus?" And Paul thought, oh no, here we go. He said, "You won't believe it." He goes, "Did you know that once he was died and then he came alive?" And Paul said, "Well, some people believe that. I don't." And crestfallen, Tice just began to walk away, and Paul thought, oh, one of those bad parenting moments. So he tried to turn it around. He said, "Hey, Tice, did you know that they say something else about Jesus, that he walked on the water?" And Tice turned around and said, "That's impossible." He'd have to have a swimming certificate for that. It's funny what we believe and don't believe, isn't it? I mean, really, we're all a bunch of walking contradictions. Just a couple weeks ago, 2 planes were flying over Arizona. Maybe you read about it. And they each separately reported that they saw something above them, a number of thousands of feet, that they couldn't identify. And they radioed in separately about it. Remember, it was over Arizona. Now, despite any evidence that might be revealed, people have already made up their minds. It's 2 categories, right? There either are UFOs, and that's absolutely what it was, or there are not UFOs. It was a weather balloon. You know what? It's similar with faith. For those who choose to believe, no miracle is necessary. For those who choose not to believe, no miracle is sufficient. But today, I'm not asking you to believe in any particular way. All I ask is that you open to the possibility of resurrection. Maybe you think Jesus walked on water, or maybe you just think that he knew where the rocks were. It doesn't matter. It's not about proof, it's about perspective. The power of resurrection is not confined to a doctrine, a tradition, or a place. I mean, think about it. Even after the stone was rolled away, Jesus could have stayed there looking all shiny and resurrection-like with a dazzling white smile, sitting by the pile of cloths, just waiting for someone to look in so he could say, "Told you." But he didn't. No one could point and say, "Right there." Why? Because he's been let loose. Now think about it. They described his death in excruciating detail, right? But resurrection happens like a whisper. Wait, what? How? Where? Because resurrection is a mystery, just like God is a mystery and faith is a mystery. And I don't know about you, but I am comforted by mystery. Maybe it's my fundamentalist upbringing, but certainty makes me very nervous. You know what? Certainty can be its own tomb sometimes. But in the mystery, there's room for all of us to not only imagine it, but to experience it without formula, without it being mediated by somebody else. How about that? I could use a little more from you. Because I'm all fired up and I want you to be. You see, the gospel story has room for all different ways of experiencing and believing. There were 3 disciples and all believed differently. The other disciple, the one whom Jesus loved, it said, got to the tomb first but did not go in first. You know, most people think that that was John. But it could have been Lazarus, the one whom Jesus loved. So let's imagine it's Lazarus. He gets there, but he didn't go in the tomb. Makes sense. Been there, done that. Only after Peter goes in does Lazarus go in, and it says that he believes. It makes sense. He knew about tombs and he knew about resurrection. Second, when Peter arrives, runs in headlong, as is his way always, but there's no indication that he believes. I don't know. Maybe after his denial, he's not too keen to see his teacher again. Or just maybe he is so desperate to make things right that he would give anything to do it again. But he was so wanting that, he wouldn't even allow a crack of hope into that cold tomb. And then there's Mary Magdalene. Faithful, loving Mary. So attached to Jesus, but even she does not believe until she hears her name. And of course, then there's the rest of them that don't even get mentioned. Thomas, dubbed the doubter, right? The others who didn't even show up. But you see, friends, there's room for us all. There's room for us all. But here's what's true. Eventually, they all allow themselves to be changed by encounter, by relationship with the risen one and with one another. They were transformed by love. I want to suggest that it was love that raised Jesus up from that tomb. Love that is unafraid of the blurred lines between what we describe as life and death. Because I learned long ago that love is stronger than death. And if you have loved in this room, and if you have lost somebody, you know that love is stronger than death. You see, it wasn't in just that moment that their lives were transformed. Every time this teacher was with his friends, they became stronger, wiser, kinder, more daring. They became more and more themselves, and they had transformational relationships with one another. That's what we're called to as people of faith, to have transformational relationships with one another. And I fear that our relationships in this day and age have become far more transactional with one another. Whether it's a like on Facebook or a following on Instagram, I do something and I expect something back. Because we live in a society, tell me it isn't true, we live in a society where the market is the bottom line. Is it true? The market is the bottom line. And that paradigm, hear me now, that mindset, that structure seeps into our relational structures too. So I do something for you and you do something for me. And our relationships far too often are transactional. And I want to suggest they are meant to be transformational. Do you want some resurrection in your life this morning? Do you want more life? Do you want your life to be larger than whatever you're going through personally, whatever you read on the news? Do you want that? Let go of striving to believe in a particular thing, but allow yourself to hear your name in relationship and to be in encounter, to love. Because relationships are at the heart of transformation and at the heart of resurrection. And I'll tell you what, I have been guilty of having my relationships sometimes being more transactional and forgetting about the power of transformation and the staying power of simply being with people rather than giving up on them because I didn't get what I expected out of them to give to me. But when you allow yourself to be transformed, when you're a resurrected person and you live in that identity, you will see resurrection in the midst of ruin. You will discover goodness and decency that rises above the vitriol and viciousness that is out there on the airwaves. You will give witness to another way of being in the world, and you will see resurrection everywhere. If you seek it, you will find it in your most intimate and your most unlikely encounters. Are you with me so far? In times like these, we need a resurrection perspective. We need to reverse the direction of things because we are more acquainted with the ways of death than we are with the ways of life. Somebody say that's the truth. Oh, I could talk about the ways that we are familiar with death in detail. But I'm talking about resurrection because the world is stuck in the tomb and it's time to get out. Amen. See, we all have a resurrection certificate, and it's signed by the people who have helped resurrect us, who have been transformational in our lives. I am here today because of my transformational relationships. Even those that have gone on, I am here today. I've been transformed by Martin Luther King Jr. Because as we commemorate his assassination 50 years ago this coming week, have no doubt that his spirit has resurrected in those young people across the nation. People have transformed me. I am a risen person today because of the black South African friend of mine, Maveli Diko, who taught me that betrayal never has the last word, that forgiveness is always possible. I'm here today because of Janie Spar, who, when I was afraid that I would lose my ministry when I came out, and I went to her and I told her my story in fear and trembling, she simply looked at me and said, "Welcome home." I'm here today because of Joyce Nixon, who was stuck in her role, her class, her gender, her demons, but who told me, you can be anything you want to be. I'm here today because of my best friend, Beth Sandell, who pulled me from the tomb of depression when I didn't believe in myself any longer. I'm here today because of Ann Lee for the last 25 years, through thick and thin, has transformed me by simply saying, get out there, show up, be yourself. I've been transformed by Jorge, who just reminded me this past month, Penny, what do you think the gospel is about? Been transformed by Carl Westerhoff, who opened my eyes to Jesus' love of the poor, and Jim Matulski, who taught me that you never give up. And I've been transformed by community. By the Metropolitan Community Church, when in the midst of death every week we talked about hope. In the midst of being told we were an abomination, we celebrated with spirit that we were beloved by God. I'm transformed. I'm risen today because of that. And then there's you people. CCSM. Have we had a journey of transformation or what? Right? I mean, we became a sanctuary church, and that's just one thing. We change each other. Oh, it's messy sometimes, right? Sometimes you don't like what I say, do you? You know what? Sometimes I don't like what you say either. That's just the truth. But what we do, we stay in relationship. Amen. And if we stay, we're transformed. You flee, you can't be transformed. Sometimes you need to run, absolutely. But most of the time, it's the staying. And friends, from the depth of my good old Baptist soul, I've been resurrected by the Spirit of the risen Christ, who called me by name out of the tomb of homophobia and sexism that the church had built, who called me by name and said, you come out and you let your light shine. So, I don't know about walking on water. I don't know about UFOs. But I know something about resurrection. And so do you. So let's live it together. Amen.